My mother is an educator, and she graduated from high school at 16, and she went to college at that age. So education has always been something that's very important in our family. You know, our family belief is that, you know, you can achieve great success through education, and I think a lot of people in America have that belief. Certainly a lot of African Americans coming out of the South, education was a way to, you know, to achieve great success. It was the great equalizer. So obviously when I began to have challenges in school, this was a big deal in my family. So when I started to have challenges in school, right around the second grade, this was a real, this was, you know, red flags, red lights flashing for my parents. And at the time, there was no such thing as ADHD, or there was not the diagnosis. So they really didn't understand what was going on. So I was, for the most part, I was a happy child, very outgoing, very athletic, but I really struggled in school. I just couldn't sit still, and I felt bored in my classrooms. And so I would tend to focus more on what was going on outside. What I wanted to show was that, you know, although I was a kid who had many advantages, and I, you know, in these pictures I just look like a normal kid, I was really dealing with something that was devastating me on the inside, and that was my ADHD. I didn't know what it was or how to manage it. So high school was very, very challenging for me, and primarily because I was studying things that I wasn't interested in, which is why I, you know, really promote, for ADHD kids, I really promote, you know, finding what those kids are good at, and then discovering where those skills and competencies lead. So high school was very challenging. I did go to college. I studied acting, and I honestly think that my parents relented because they just didn't know what else I could do. They really didn't have a lot of, their expectations at that point were very low for me in terms of what I could create for myself career-wise, given that their paradigm was based on academic achievement. And so I went to college and I chose acting, much to the chagrin of my parents. However, they allowed me to investigate this thing that I was very passionate about. I became obsessed with acting, and I was good at it. All of the things that were really challenging for me in high school, like trying to manage my imagination in the classroom. In acting, I was allowed to let my imagination run free, and I felt as if I had been freed. And so I was good at acting, I was passionate about acting, and I quickly rose to the top of my class. And left my ADHD in the distance, or in the past, or at least that's how I felt. It was in the far away past distance. So, you know, I began to, you know, act, and I started to have success with acting, and, you know, didn't really think much about my ADHD after that. It was just a part of me. And again, I was undiagnosed, so I didn't know that there was something that I was really managing, even though I was managing it. So let's cut to Army Wives, where I had an opportunity to, you know, just play a wonderful character, Colonel Joan Burton. And my ADHD didn't give me too much trouble in this arena because acting is something that suits my particular ADHD brain. Although sometimes I would run into challenges. For example, if we were on set and there were lots and lots of things going on. If we were on one of those, if we were shooting a scene that was outside and there was lots of activity, lots of moving people and moving parts, I would have a very tough time focusing on the person who was standing just directly across from me. And I would go up on my lines, and it would be very challenging for me to stay focused because there was just so much going on. And so that was something that I really, really struggled with. And to the point where I would be very nervous on those days when we had those large groups of people, lots of extras and lots of activity, because I was always concerned that I would go up on my line. I was afraid. I didn't trust my brain, because it didn't matter how much I studied. It didn't matter how many times I went over my lines. No matter how much I prepared, if I was in that type of a situation, there was a possibility that I would go up on my lines just because of all the stimulus around me. So that was very, very challenging. So here are just a few more pictures of me as this character, Colonel Joan Burton. So let's cut to the ADHD champion. My daughter, when she got to the second grade, she started, or shall I say her teacher, requested that I have her tested for ADHD. My daughter had always had lots of energy, a lot more energy than the other kids. She was a lot stronger, faster. She was just a lot of kid. And I loved that about her. I saw myself in her, and I was engaged by it and enchanted by that, and also horrified because I knew my own experience in high school, and I was very afraid that she may experience the same thing. And she did. In second grade, her teacher asked me to test her for ADHD. She was tested, and it was confirmed. Now, I had heard about ADHD before my daughter's diagnosis, but had compartmentalized it, sort of put it on the shelf. That's not me. That's not us. And it wasn't until my daughter was diagnosed and I discovered that ADHD is something that is hereditary that I decided to get tested, and it was confirmed that I also have ADHD. And in that moment, my entire childhood was explained to me. And so I began to deal with the challenges that ADHD presents for a child in school. You know, in my own personal life as an adult, I had learned to do the things that I was really good at. I would, the things that I'm not very good at, I would, basically have people do those things for me. I would pay people to do those things for me, like accounting and bookkeeping. Oh my gosh, it's just not my thing. So I had pretty much set up my life so I didn't have to really deal with the things that would sort of bring out my ADHD qualities. With my young daughter, all of a sudden, here I am dealing with ADHD in a school setting again. So it's a little bit like having a nightmare, reliving it again. But what I saw was that my daughter had an advantage that I didn't have, and that advantage was that she was diagnosed and there was support available to her. And that's when I discovered CHAD. And CHAD has such an incredible wealth of information for parents, for anyone who is looking to support a person living with ADHD. And, it really just, the CHAD website really just filled me in on everything that I needed to know about how to support my daughter, how to support her at home and at school, how to be her number one ally in the school system, and just how to support her in her development and maintaining self-esteem. And so after spending a lot of time on the CHAD website and devouring so much of the information that they have there, that's when I decided to contact them and ask if they needed my support in any way, because they had been so helpful to me. And really, that's how that's how we came together. And I'm just so honored to have an opportunity to share my story, to spread the word about ADHD being different, not defective, and also spreading the word about CHAD and how it's such a tremendous resource for those who are looking to uplift and empower the people in their lives who are living with ADHD. I would say that I'm living with ADHD. I choose to leave the word struggle out because I'm not up for struggling, but I'm up for living. I choose the word challenge because with my daughter, she would often say things like, "This is hard." And I would say, "It's not hard, it's a challenge." She's very competitive, she's athletic, she likes challenges, she doesn't like things that are hard. So I do experience challenges. However, because I see myself as different and not defective, I am okay with those challenges. I just accept that there are things that I'm not good at, and that's what makes me different. And so I need to figure out how I can get it done effectively and get it done in a way that is, I'm really big on doing things well. So how I can get it done and how I can get it done, how it can be done in the best way. So I do use medication, and a lot of people are on the fence about medication. I'll tell you my own personal experience with medication. Because I was not diagnosed until well into my 30s, I lived most of my adult life without the use of ADHD medication. And as I said, there would be times, very specific times at work where no matter what I did, I couldn't remember my lines. And regardless of what I did, how long I studied, how many times I went over those lines, I couldn't remember those lines. And it was very, very challenging and devastating for me because there would be 200 or 300 people standing around waiting for me to say this one particular line. And if I didn't get it right, we'd have to go all the way back to the top. We'd have to cut the scene and then go back. Obviously, that is embarrassing. And also, it costs the production company money. So when I discovered that I have ADHD and read up on the medications, I felt like I had nothing to lose because this was something that was actually, detrimental to my career and my job. So I tried ADHD medication, and it made a significant improvement in my ability to focus on those days. I mean, really night and day. As I mentioned earlier, before the medication, I didn't trust my own brain because no matter what I did, no matter how long I studied, there was still a possibility that I would go up on my lines. And I lost a lot of sleep over that. With the medication, I felt more confident that I could retain my lines, and I did. So it made a really big difference for me in the actual practice of retaining my lines and also in how I felt about my ability to produce on the day. Well, I also wanted to share just one more thing. You know, I didn't have a specific opinion about the medication one way or the other when I was diagnosed. And I think that's why my story about the medication is valuable, because I am a person who spent many years without medication and then had the opportunity to choose it, to try to see if it actually made a difference for me. And it did. So I know there are a lot of parents out there who have ADHD children and they're not sure about the medication. They're not sure if it helps. There are definitely side effects that need to be managed. And I know that that is a big concern for parents as well. And I don't know if I were a parent who didn't have ADHD, if I hadn't experienced the actual benefits of medication myself, I don't know how I would feel as well. So I really am happy that I had an opportunity to share my story about it. I do think medication can be very helpful. I don't think medication 365 days a year. I don't believe in that either, because I want my daughter I want her to develop the ability to manage herself without medication. So, you know, my particular setup is we use the medication during for school, and then the rest of the time she's pretty much just managing her own behavior. Figure out, find out, discover what your child is good at, and develop those things. Because one of the things about ADHD kids is they may be really struggling in some areas, but they're oftentimes really good at something else. Like my daughter she's extremely athletic. And so she has an awful lot of confidence in the area of athletics. And so my recommendation would be to find those things that your daughter is good at and develop those things, because what will happen is her confidence in the area that your daughter is good at, or I'll just use my daughter, her confidence in the area of athletics will spread. And hopefully that it will spread into some of the academic areas as well. But that's the plan, is just to really, you know, build those things that she's really good at, and hopefully the confidence in those areas will spread into some of the areas where she's not as confident. In the African American community, as well as in the Latino community, there's a real, there's a tendency to shy away from things like this, right? I mean, there's a tendency to shy away from, I would say, medical treatment in general. And so that just really rolls over into the ADHD realm. I would say, if you're having that challenge, I mean, Chad has such an amazing website that shows all of the, the very critical information that has to do with ADHD, that this is not in our head. I mean, that's sort of like one of the big challenges out there. People think that ADHD is something that we just came up with because we're all just lazy. And so I completely understand what she's talking about. And I think using materials and resources, Chad has lots of them, to really share the validity of ADHD, backed up by experts and scientists, backed up with the data. I think that can go a long way. ADHD is hereditary, and I'm the first person in my family that's been diagnosed with ADHD. But I can look back at my relatives, my older relatives and my younger relatives, and I see ADHD in our family. It's something that has been there all along. And when I came out, quote unquote, with my ADHD story, my cousin called me, with tears in her eyes, and she said, my daughter, she has ADHD, and thank you so much for coming out. So even within my own family, here I am, the spokesperson, and it's still something we're not even talking about in my family, even though ADHD is pervasive and in my family, on both sides. So get them that information. Let them know that ADHD is not a curse. It's not a disease. It's something that can be managed, and that they can, people with ADHD can live, wonderful lives. It's something that they can definitely live with. That's, I think, the most important thing. Well, Sarah, my family, with the response that I got from my family was, "Is that what that is?" I mean, I think collectively we knew that there was something that was different about Wendy. And so when I was formally diagnosed, then I think it made my family, my immediate family, my parents, feel a lot better. I think they actually felt a little guilty, because when I was growing up, there was a lot of just do better. Wendy, just put your mind to it. You can do it. Focus more. There was a lot of, stop being lazy and just focus. And I think that my mother in particular felt a little guilt about that. And of course I shared with her that she was and is the greatest mother on the planet, so don't feel guilty. But we knew there was something always there, and so we finally had a name for it. With my daughter, I mean, I see how she gets sidetracked pretty quickly. Like if I tell her to, go to the garage and get the bucket, well, 3 to 5 minutes will go by. And I'll go into the garage, and she's, in the corner, playing with, whatever. And, if I didn't know that this was a symptom of ADHD, that might cause me to get frustrated. But I get how her brain works. So instead of getting angry with her or frustrated with her, I just get it. I just get her back on task. And I think that that's helpful. I mean, listen, I do get frustrated sometimes. I'm not going to pretend that is not something that happens, that once you get diagnosed, that everyone will understand, and that people around you won't get frustrated anymore. But it's a lot less, because I get it. And I know how to get her back on track now. Tricks of the trade. List. I mean, that has been the number one most effective tool that I've found, is list making. Even though my daughter's morning routine is the same every single morning, she still gets off track unless she uses a list. So we have just a list that we print up every week, Monday through Friday, and it has the things that she has to do in the morning before she goes to school, and it also has the things that she needs to do after school. And you wouldn't believe how helpful it is. I mean, it's just, she's just kind of moving around the house, checking off that list as she goes. And on the days that list is not provided or made available to her, things begin to fall off. It's amazing how something as simple and inexpensive as a list can be so effective. And find out what he's passionate about, because that passion is going to create something, a different kind of energy in the area of focus, which some people call hyperfocus. So ADHD, some ADHDers have the ability to hyperfocus on a particular subject that they're fascinated with. And I was fascinated with acting. So discover what he's good at. And sometimes what you can do is there may be qualities that your son has, there may be activities that your son is really good at that don't necessarily, that you can't think of how does this skill translate into university study and then creating a job beyond that, a career beyond that. Well, I have a cousin who was hyper-focused, an ADHD cousin who was hyper-focused on video games, right? He was a master at video games when he was a boy. And he went to college, and now he develops video games for a big video company. And so something that looks as frivolous as mastery in video games can actually turn into a career that is quite lucrative and something that will keep your son, happy and healthy as he develops as a man. I went to an ADHD specialist. I was living in Charleston shooting Army wives at the time. And I was put into a small gray room. You know where this is going. And I was put in a small gray room in front of a computer. And there was there were several tests that I took on this computer that had to do with, I found these tests very interesting in the sense that they didn't have anything to do with intelligence or basically your knowledge, right? Because every test that I had been given, up until that point, had to do with a specific topic, but this was almost like a vision test, and it just literally tested my ability to focus. And there was one test that I remember in particular, and I hated this whole testing process. I mean, literally, I just wanted out of that room because the test is designed to bring out your ADHD qualities and to distinguish what they are and exactly the degree of your ADHD. So it was a horrible test. But I remember this one test in particular where there were flashing letters, and I had to tap the button every time I saw an R. And when the letters were going, when the letters were going through succession quickly, it was much easier for me to focus. But when they changed the speed of the letters, I found it very challenging to simply even pay attention to the computer screen. I found myself, my mind wandering because the pace of the letter succession was not fast enough for me. So I thought that was interesting. I hated that test, but I also saw just how quickly I lost interest when the stimulus wasn't vibrant enough for me. So I found it very interesting, and I'd hate to do it again. That's how uncomfortable it was. But important to do. I do, in the sense that I feel that because it is something that really isn't dealt with in the African American community, culturally, it is more challenging, I think, for African American kids. And I think sometimes kids who, or I would speak specifically about, I have one young cousin who, in my opinion, he's a card-carrying ADHD kid. And those challenges in school really led to, behavior that was inappropriate, led to some illegal activity, and it has just really devastated his life. And to me, that it really all began when there was a certain behavior that wasn't actually diagnosed. So here we have a kid who has low self-esteem and a lot of energy, isn't thriving in school, and so instead of getting the help that he needs, he just decides, and a lot of ADHD kids decide that school is not where they're going to find their success. And so I think in any community, African American, Latino community as well, I think if we can, distinguish that, this is something that impacts all people of all walks of life, and that, if you have a child that has ADHD, if they are diagnosed, there's an awful lot of support out there for them, and it can actually, in my belief, save their lives. I would first encourage them to shift their paradigm about ADHD. It's really the only way to go. You have to reconsider what you believe about it. When I shifted my paradigm from defective to different, it changed my whole world. Of course you don't want to go get diagnosed to find out that you're defective. Who's lining up for that one? No one. But if you have this difference that is real, that can be challenging in some areas, and you can get support in those areas if you're diagnosed, then that's something that you may be willing to go get a yes or no answer on. I mean, I find that in terms of my own journey, when I felt that there was something wrong with me, my self-esteem was very, very low. But the moment I shifted it from I'm different, not defective, and that is a true definition of ADHD, because it's a choice. It's how I'm choosing to define my life, and this part of me. Choosing the word different gives me the ability, or empowers me to move past the challenges in a way that doesn't shut me down emotionally. And I find that that's one of the biggest challenges with ADHD. How do you promote resilience and self-esteem and self-love with ADHD? I sometimes there are days when I don't accomplish what I'd like to, and I can very easily, beat up on myself. I'm really good at that. But with my ADHD, I just sort of accept it and say, okay, you didn't finish what you needed to do. You're different, and it's okay. Tomorrow's another day. And that gives me the ability to sleep at night, and that's really all I'm up to. I'm just doing this one day at a time, and, my goal is to live a happy life. So shifting your paradigm about what ADHD is, I would think would be the first thing that she would need to do. I actually utilize a tutor because I found that working with my daughter on her homework, you have two ADHDers together looking over, worksheets, and I found, because my own personal attention span on this type of work is short. So, you know, I found myself wanting to get through it as quickly as possible. And that wasn't serving my daughter. So I put that in the category of things that I'm not the best at that. So I've, you know, provided a tutor for my daughter so that she can get what she needs instead of you know, trying to help her myself. I just don't have that. There's not something. I mean, I help her with her homework on simple things and easy things, but for the you know, day-to-day process, I do definitely utilize a tutor because it's something that frustrates me personally. So I don't want to pass that frustration on to her. Well, one of the things that, this is, I guess, when my daughter was first diagnosed, and I was diagnosed as well, I started looking for positive information about ADHD, and it's actually can be challenging to find. There's some really positive information on the CHADS website, but overall, the predominant feeling about ADHD is that it is a big problem. It's a disease, that if you have ADHD, you will struggle and become suicidal and become involved in all kinds of things that don't serve you. And, you know, this is sort of the predominant belief, cultural belief about ADHD is that if you are a person with ADHD and you're successful, that you are the exception instead of the norm. That the rest of those people with ADHD, you know, there's a big problem with them. And so that's why I decided to get involved, because I remember finding a poster online, and it was, you know, it was posted that said something like, you know, these people have been successful with ADHD, you can be too. And it had, you know, like Albert Einstein, Richard Branson, and, you know, Bruce Jenner, and John F. Kennedy, and it had all these people that had been incredibly successful and who had, you know, managed ADHD or ADHD characteristics. And so I thought that was really powerful. And so I decided to take up this, you know, charge to get the word out about ADHD. I'm not saying that it's not a challenge sometimes. You know, I don't want people to think that I'm communicating that it's all like, you know, cookies and cream. It isn't. But I do want to communicate that with diagnosis and treatment, you can learn to manage it in a way that, you know, minimizes the sort of, I would say, minimizes the sort of harmful qualities that ADHD can bring about, and you can create an incredible life for yourself.